So our guest speaker tonight is quite young and yet belongs to an eclectic set of a handful of people who have been bold and daring to break away from the comfort of being a part of a big newspaper or a TV group and branch out on her own, heralding a new wave of journalism that is independent, bold, and fiercely neutral. Allow me to introduce to you the young Faye D'Souza, shepherding her own digital news channel for the last 5 years. She will take us through the transformative journey of news consumption, as many of us prefer to listen to independent and neutral news over mainstream media, which she will tell you operates under many constraints and business compulsions. Digital journalist Faye D'Souza will delve into factors driving its growth, including erosion of trust and the demand for a fresh perspective. She will examine the challenges and opportunities for independent journalists like herself and what this growing trend means for the future of information dissemination, democracy, and the public's role in shaping this narrative. Faye D'Souza is an award-winning journalist and an entrepreneur, and in a short span of time has over 3 million followers on social media. While she delivers reliable, non-partisan news, at the same time addressing pressing social, civic, and financial issues that are faced by you and me on a daily basis. Recipient of the prestigious Ramnath Goenka Award, Faye began her career at CNBC TV 18, covering business, finance, and insurance, and later shifted to ET Now, where she focused on personal finance. She became the youngest woman journalist to head a national TV news channel, Mirror Now, and led the channel to remarkable success whilst holding several authorities accountable for their action. I give you Faye D'Souza.
Good evening, everyone. Mr. Balsara, thank you so much for inviting me here. It's an honor to be here today. I'm especially excited about being referred to as young. But also to be here on an evening where we celebrate a gentleman who stood for professionalism, for excellence and integrity, something that I have looked up to and idealized my entire career. The humor and the toasts I'll aspire to. Would it be easier if I stepped away from this podium? Okay. Always felt that podiums were designed for men. Out of nervousness that I might bore you this evening, I prepared a presentation of visual aid just to keep you interested. So we have photographs to look at. And I wondered what I could possibly say that would be of interest to this group, given that you know so much more about the industry and the sector than I do. And I've decided to simply share my story and everything that I've learned from the ups and downs of my career. And hopefully in that there are insights for you, the fact that you run this fascinating industry. So, hello. I'm starting with this photograph. That child is me. And that cow was my cow. because I was born, like I was telling someone, in a village in Karnataka called Chikmagalur. My parents were agriculturists. I come from a long line of agriculturists. I had absolutely no connection at all to media, to journalism, to advertising, to anything that happens in any of our big cities. But I was raised on a constant, healthy respect for the working class Indian, who works in the fields, who works in the sun, who grows our food, who looks after our cattle, who milks the cows and brings the milk in every day. And my parents would constantly point out that these are the people you have to look after, these are the people we have to respect, this is where your food comes from. And I think a large part of the work that I have done comes from that foundation, that what gets decided in big rooms like this affects the people on the field and the people on the ground who are doing the work. My first job in media was while I was still studying to be a journalist, and I was doing my master's in Bangalore. I had the opportunity to work for All India Radio. So the hallowed and rather empty halls of Prasar Bharati, where I worked as a late night RJ, and I also got to read the news on All India Radio Bangalore at the top of the hour. Now, RJing basically meant that, you know, love-struck people in Bangalore would call me in the middle of the night and dedicate songs to their girlfriends at the other end of the city. It was always the same song, and I had to read out their message. But the really exciting part for me was that I got to read the news, which was amazing because I was, you know, when we were growing up, my dad would insist that compulsory viewing in our house was World This Week in the 80s, because he believed that Prannoy Roy had excellent English and great pronunciation. So he would line us up, and we were 4 siblings, and we had to watch it every week. And it was, for me, an opening into the world of what the sights and the sounds and what news was and how beautifully it could be presented. And so when in All India Radio I was told I would read the news, it was exciting. The news, though, in All India Radio was not exciting, because 10 minutes before the news had to happen, one very bored engineer would come and hand me one fax like this. News. Take it. And that fax, as many will remember, the first story was always about what the Prime Minister had done that day. The second story was always about a cabinet minister, either finance or external affairs. The third story was some government announcement, and the last one was always cricket scores. And day in and day out, this was the content of that news bulletin. And they had drilled it into us that we had to read out this bulletin even-toned, without any emotion, without changing a single word, because that is how the news had to be respected. But the content that they would hand to us was abysmal. So in my mind, and that I think based a foundation for me, that the tone and the respect was really important, but the content needed to be far more independent. I finished my master's and I moved to Mumbai, and like Mr. Balsara pointed out, I worked for CNBC TV 18, which was a stock market channel, the only one in the country at that time, when the Nifty was at 2,300. And it was even-toned, and it was a great place to learn a skill as a journalist, because there were a lot of great journalists there who taught us how to do our job. And I was assigned the insurance beat because nobody else wanted it. It was considered extremely boring. So for 2 years, I had to track insurance. And I learned there how to break down complex ideas in a way that people can understand, and how to respect the people who are affected by the idea of insurance. My big break, incidentally, came in 2005 when I was working for CNBC and Mumbai flooded. And for an insurance reporter, when all the cars in the city were underwater and all the godowns and all the homes and everything else was flooded, it was a great way to start doing stories about, are these people going to get their money back? Are these people going to get their cars back? Are these people going to get the saman in their godowns back? And I set off with my camera person, wading through the water, meeting the people who had struggled and had suffered, and raising their issues. And it was the first time I stood out as a journalist, and I learned that it matters what the people need, what do the citizen needs, what affects people. It's not about the noise, about the gossip, about the politics, about the opinion, but it's about what people need. I had the good fortune of working for CNBC for many years. I shifted then to the Times Network, where I tracked personal finance. And then I had the opportunity, under M.K. Anand, who was a mentor, to launch a channel called Magic Bricks Now. I don't know how many of you remember it. It was short-lived, but it was good fun. It was meant to be, incidentally, it was Anand's brainchild, it was meant to be Times property on television. So it was effectively an advertiser-funded program. And we wrote the plan and we pitched it and we got the lead sponsor, which was incidentally inside the group. But we got to put this channel up and I was really young and we put the team together, it was exciting. And there was a question of what are you going to do at prime time? Because, you know, the rest of the day is advertiser-funded, but prime time, you've got to come up with something. And we came up with the idea of the urban debate, which was, what do citizens need? Because it doesn't matter if you bought the home, if your air is poison, if your water is poison, if your roads are full of potholes, and if no one is looking after you. And the success of that show was astounding. This was a tiny channel, it had a really small team, but people were suddenly watching because we were operating at a time when all the rest of the channels were, if I'm not mistaken, entirely talking about Pakistan, or they were talking about nationalism, or they were threatening each other on screen to sing Vande Mataram and say, do you know it, I know it better than you. But nobody was talking about what citizens actually want. Now, as luck would have it, after we launched this channel, the real estate sector tanked. And so all the money that we thought would come in to support this channel didn't come in. And there was left a choice of what do we do with this channel that's been launched. And the decision was that we take what the primetime show had learned and make the whole channel do that. And that is how Mirror Now was born. Overnight, Magic Bricks Now became Mirror Now, and it had a tagline called You First. And it was a beautiful mandate for a young journalist to focus on citizens first. So it was not about which political party was in power. It was not about whether they were Hindus or Muslims. It was not about hate. It was not about divide. It was about what does the citizen want? Do you have what you paid for as a customer of this government? And it was a dream job for me because I had a dream team to work with. Young people who were disruptors, who just went after everything. And within the 2 years that I was there at that channel, we swept every single journalism award in this country. We became widely appreciated, and we disrupted the way news was being done in India altogether. It was a wonderful place to be, to have the backing of this large television channel, the crores of rupees of equipment that one gets to run, the team that could have only been put together by fate, I thought. But in 2019, I was faced with a very challenging decision of whether to stay at this dream job or to leave. And it's been a matter of great controversy as to why I decided to leave. The short answer is that I just felt that I did not have the freedom anymore to do the stories I wanted to do, to ask the questions I felt needed to be asked. And so in a very difficult moment, I decided that if it's not going to be honest, then I will in fact leave. So in 2019, I exited my dream job. And it was the hardest thing I have ever done. When I look back now, I realize that the reason why we reached a point where we couldn't tell the stories is because television news as a business model was failing. It was very expensive to run. It required a great deal of infrastructure. It required licensing. It required distribution. And a lot of money was being poured in, but the audience was leaving. Because more and more I would meet people who would say, I really loved that thing you did. I saw it on my phone. Because people were no longer switching on their televisions. Because it was too loud, it was too noisy. And it was also inconvenient. Younger and younger people had decided that they would not watch traditional linear television anymore. And so that meant that the organizations that were running these expensive television channels had to become more and more desperate for TRPs. And so the TRPs and the corporate structure and the political influence was taking precedence over the citizen, the story, the journalism, and the credibility. This was 5 years ago, when I thought that the situation was very bad. It has gotten progressively worse since then. And I'm very glad to say that I left at the right time. But when I switch on the television now, by mistake, no one should do it on purpose anymore, it is astounding what is happening on these channels, where it's no longer in the non-fiction category. They're now producing fiction on a nightly basis. And that is because there's a desperate need to hold on to the 2.5 eyeballs that are still watching. But nobody is watching these channels anymore. And there was no sort of room for credibility. But coming back to where I had left, it was the first time in 18 years that I was unemployed. So all of the sort of credibility set aside, I didn't have a job. And I went through this phase of anxiety and depression. Because every morning at about 8 o'clock, in the building that I would live in, people would go to work. Children would go to school. And if you've noticed, there's like a beehive activity that happens in these buildings in the morning. And there I was, sitting in my pajamas with nowhere to go. And I had been put on gardening leave, so I couldn't work anywhere else. I'd been told not to come into the office. And I started to have physically anxious reactions at that time of the morning every day. I'd have difficulty breathing. Sometimes I would burst into tears, and I realized that something was wrong, and I actually had to see a professional and go into therapy to actually come out of that period. And I was told by the therapist that I was seeing that you need to repurpose your energy and find out what you want to do with your life. So I sat down with sheets of paper on a daily basis. For months I did this. And I asked myself, what do I want to be when I grow up? Do I still want to be a journalist? Am I any good at it? What kind of journalist do I want to be? Is there anything else I could possibly do? What is my contribution to my society, to my community, to my country? What do I want to be remembered for? And I established painfully that I am not qualified to do anything else, so I have to be a journalist. It's the only thing I've ever wanted to do from the time I was 17 years old. And then I asked myself what kind of journalist I want to be. And the answer, and the one word that I kept coming back to, is this one. Dignity is my favorite word. Our Constitution promises each one of us dignity in the first page of the preamble. And I realized that the thing that was missing was dignity. When I was working in television news, there was no dignity awarded to the subject, to the guests, to the reporters, and least of all to the audience. Because when you sit up every night and tell someone, you should be angry, you should be upset, this is not good, this is very bad, and you should side with so and so and so and so, you're insulting the intelligence of that audience. And there's no dignity in that work. And so I decided in that moment, through that exercise, that whatever work I do from here onwards, it will be based in dignity. And I don't care if it's not massive and nobody knows my name. But every day I will try and do one piece of journalism, and I'll do it with dignity. And my team and I have based our entire structure on this. This is how we do it. There's no color, there's no opinion, there's no shouting, there's no questioning. Because I realized that if I have to award my audience dignity and respect, my job as a journalist is to simply tell you what happened. It's not my job to tell you how to feel about what happened. It's not my job to tell you whether it was right or wrong, or who you should hate, or whom you should not allow into your building society. You are a functioning member of society. You can vote, which means you can also decide what is right and wrong. So I just have to tell you what happened, and you do the rest. And that's all we did. And I arrived at this particular design by accident. I was in the back of a cab, and I was on gardening leave, so I couldn't work anywhere else. And I was getting really frustrated that the stories that I believed were important were not popping up in any headline. So I wrote it on my phone. I wrote a story saying, this is news that should be the headline. And I shared it on Instagram, and it became a thing. And people started writing saying, can you do this every day? And so this was pre-COVID. And so my team and I, so my team was 2 people at this point. We started doing this every day, and I would post from my phone. And the idea was simply to write out the news as it happened, and to verify it, and to put it out in a manner that was credible and that is dignified. So over 5 years, we've built a structure of credibility and dignity, and we've done it this way. There is a process now in place. Firstly, we take everything slow. Everything is double, triple verified. Which is odd, because that's what journalism is supposed to be. But I'll give you a simple example. I don't know if you remember, but there's this young actress called Poonam Pandey who faked her own death for some activity, for a marketing activity, incidentally. And we could have a separate conversation if you think that was a good idea. But everybody was carrying the story that, oh, you know, she's dead, she's dead, she's dead, she's dead. And my team said, what do you want to do? Should we carry it or not? And I said, where's the second verification? Her team had said that she was dead, but there was no hospital statement. There was no hearse. There was no funeral. There were no Bollywood people in white streaming into her home. There was no evidence at all. And I said, okay, we're not going to run it until we have actual physical evidence. We need a second source. And by the end of next day, she popped out of nowhere and said that she's alive. Yay, it was all a hoax. And it was simple things like that, where the double verification makes a difference. And we slow the news down so that we can verify it better, because at the end of the day, there is no dearth or shortage of information on the internet. If something happens, you'll find it on your phone. There is a shortage of credibility. There's a shortage of someone to verify the information for you before you can trust it and share it. Secondly, we avoid clickbait, which means that nothing is overstated, nothing is written in an exciting way, nothing is written in a slightly misleading sort of like, come and click on this and I'll tell you how it really works sort of way, in order to respect you and know that if it is important, you will still read it. And I don't have to write it in a naughty way to get your attention. We maintain objectivity, which is difficult to do in this political environment globally right now. But we always, what I do is I have 3 people on my team. 1 person writes it, 1 person checks it, I rewrite it again, and then the 3rd person checks it again. And thereby checking each other to make sure that no one person's opinion has slipped through in any of the writing. And finally, and number 4, and I feel that this is the most important one, we own up to our mistakes and we apologize. Because journalists are human beings as well. All newsrooms are run by human beings, and you will make mistakes. We will get things wrong. But a good journalist will always apologize, because it is your job to ensure that the audience no longer believes, even for a moment, that your error is in fact true. And I want to give you a non-political example, and I think it's a really good example. When the actress Sri Devi passed away, do you remember? There was speculation on the evening news about how tall she is, how deep the bathtub is, whether or not she had been murdered, whether it was a family member who murdered her, and what really happened. And again, at that time, I remember calling a colleague in Dubai and asking that person to go to the embassy and find out what's going on. And she said there's no evidence of any foul play. But these channels went on and on and on. And you remember them. You're all nodding. You remember those stories. It has been 6 or 7 years since she passed away today. Not one of them have apologized for that misleading report. for tarnishing the memory of an actor who had worked her entire life. There is not a shred of evidence of foul play at all in her death. But these channels made a meal that day. They accused her family in the most undignified fashion, all for one night's TRPs. This was not a political story. There was nothing to be gained from doing that except one night's TRP, and they all did it. And not one has apologized since then. And I think that that, for me, is the line in the sand about where the credibility and the dignity is. And it's not about politics. And it's not about siding one half of government or the other half of government. It's about having your loyalty at the end of the day with your audience and with the dignity and the respect that you award your audience. And simply by doing exactly this, working from home, my team and I started putting out information during COVID of what each government was deciding to do, whether you could go out, not go out, what the latest decision was, what the latest numbers were. And since then, and I was at 35,000 on Instagram when I had left television, we are now at 100 million views every month on Instagram. On a big week, when there's an election, it goes up to 250 million views. This second chart that we're looking at, I think I've been told I can do this. Okay. It says 8% of the interactions. So this is interactions of people who've responded, clicked, liked, shared, so more than just read. They've gone one step further. 8% of those interactions are from non-followers. And these are the number of accounts that were engaged, that are on an average engaged in 30 days. Some of the beautiful things that we figured out from digital media, from just looking at these numbers, is that 82% of the views are coming from people in the 18 to 34 age bracket. So young people are interested. They are invested. They're reading about it. They're commenting on it. They're getting involved in what's happening in the world. They just want it delivered to them in a way that's non-intrusive and non-abrasive. This is an example I wanted to give you. It's a recent example. It was about 2 months ago when the CMD of L&T suggested that people work on Sundays because you shouldn't be going home and looking at your wife on Sunday. The story that we wrote out has no opinion in it at all. It simply lists out what he said. Over 500,000 people read the story. 80% of them were non-followers, which means the people who follow read and shared it with a larger universe of people who then came back and commented. And that is how the story has moved on social media. 73,000 people commented and interacted with that story. And we had to do nothing. Didn't have to put out an opinion, didn't have to tell you whether it's good or bad, didn't have to tell you how to feel about it, didn't have to build an argument. The audience built their own argument. All we had to do was respect their intelligence. This is my favorite chart. When I was working in television, I was told constantly that women don't watch news. One individual went as far as to tell me that I should hire a man to sit next to me on my show to make myself seem more credible, because only men watch news and they won't trust a woman's voice. I was also told to keep my voice low because apparently women's voices are annoying to men. So it turns out that that's not true. Women will watch the news if you do it with dignity. And if you do it well. And this is not women-centric news. This is regular news. This is elections, this is, this is malnourishment, this is business, this is stocks, this is everything. 50% of these viewers are women. Of course, not everything is easy in the garden of digital news. there's a big question of who will pay to run these businesses. Will it be the advertiser? Will it be the audience? And everyone from the New York Times downwards is trying to figure out the answer to that question. I personally think it's going to be a mix of both. Advertisers will have to find the right journalist you want to partner with, and the audience will have to find the content that you want to, that you're willing to pay for. And every business will have to find a balance between these two things. The second question that Mr. Balsara and I discussed is how can brands associate with news that's communicating in this way? Brands will have to pick partners. And I don't know if the FCT format where you can plug something in and have it run multiple times through the day, if that format has any room in digital news. But I think the partnership route has room, where brands decide that this is someone I want to be associated with, I like what this person stands for, and this is something that I will stand for, and while I'm doing it, I will step away from the uncredible stuff that happens on other forms of news. The biggest challenge, of course, is AI. AI is being used in many newsrooms at this point to replace research, to replace copy, but I think that the biggest risk we are running in this entire room is fake information that AI will generate. And that's a risk for every individual and every business, not just for journalism. It's possible in the future to figure out that you like to read the Washington Post and generate an entire page that for all practical purposes looks exactly like the Washington Post, and plug in only one fake story and mass produce it and pass it on to get you to believe it. That's the future we're looking at, not just fake videos and fake voice, but everything with AI can be generated fake almost instantly. And there is not enough investment going into detection, especially in India, to detect fake stories and fake AI videos and fake AI audio. And that, I believe, is going to become a challenge for all of our businesses and not just for journalism. So these, I believe, are the three big challenges for any of us in digital news. For me personally, at Beetroot, we're now taking it to the next phase. We're going to start a old school Prasar Bharati toned bulletin, which has content that the citizens are, care about. And we'll put it out behind a paywall that we are hoping people will pay for and view. We're also hoping to create now a collective where we create a home for content producers and for journalists like myself and help them monetize, help them with their legal needs, their tax needs, their filing needs, and find a revenue share model where everybody can work together and everybody finds a home. Because what has happened over the last 5 years, just like me, there are hundreds of other independent journalists who are now using YouTube and Instagram and other platforms. And the aim will be to create a new age media organization that forms a home for all of them, and so that they can all do the kind of journalism that they want to do. So I want to really thank you for your time. And I want to thank all of you, especially the ones who came over and said that you've been tracking the work and supporting the work. There are many people here. Raj Nayak is here, Sam Balsara is here. So many of you met me when I was just starting off. And it's wonderful to be back in the room with all of you and to feel like I've achieved something on my own without the backing of a big brand, enough to be invited back into this room and to speak to you. So thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Faye, for narrating your experiences from All India Radio employee to the entrepreneurs. If you can spare some time for the question and answers, yes, I'll prefer that. Sam, can you kindly come on the stage so that you can moderate this Q&A?
So we have time for some questions. Yes, Raj? Yes, please. Can you get a mic there? No. Can you get a mic there?
will impact independent journalists like you in some way. At least that's what is believed. What is your view on that?
So we don't know exactly what the government is planning. And in reaction to this recent episode of that joke that was made on India's Got Latent, yes, the Ranveer Alabadia joke, there's been mention in Supreme Court that there needs to be harder regulation on digital content. I want to believe that the same format for journalism, at least that is being followed on television and on newspaper, will be followed on digital as well, where we can form a self-regulatory mechanism and we can be accountable to that mechanism. There are a bunch of us who started, actually about 3.5 years ago, we created an association of digital news publishers. We have our own self-regulatory mechanism. We regulate ourselves, we hold ourselves accountable. We're registered with the INB ministry, so we're already preparing for that eventuality. Hopefully, that is what it remains at, and it's not worse than that.
Last question, I'll let others speak. What can the advertising fraternity do to support independent journalists like you?
Like I said, obviously, find journalists that you believe are worthy of the brand associations and brainstorm associations that will make their work more viable. I mean, we all come from an era where we remember how to do this right, where it's possible for brands and journalists to work together without impeding the voice and without impeding the independence. I think that fundamentally, for a democracy to continue to function well, we have to have a free press. I can say it without a shadow of doubt that mainstream corporate television news has entirely been dismantled and there is no free voice there at all left. Systematically been dismantled. We've heard stories and experienced stories of lists of journalists' names being handed over saying, these are the people you need to remove right now. Those people have been removed. And so that is already a write-off. And so if we want to maintain a strong democracy, we have to support independent journalism. There is no other way.
Hi, Faye. As you know, I've been a fan of yours for a long, long time when you were on television and still follow you here. But you know, one thing that does strike me is that when I followed you on television or when I watched your program on television, even if you said that I didn't color it, but your opinions, your impressions came across by the, the stories you picked or the people you put on the mat, BMC, etc., all of those that you did. But I'm just wondering that if you're going to only present the news which has already happened and get it from other sources, verify it and put it, sooner than later there will be technology that will be able to verify it and that will be able to basically scrape the internet and put the same thing there. So then what happens to journalism in that case? I get your point that it's about reaching the news, but that one day a computer software will be able to do much better and with faster perhaps.
It's a great question. Fundamentally, on the fact-checking portion, we've known that the computer software cannot entirely be trusted. Because when you say a computer software will learn how to do it, it'll have to be AI-driven. And AI already has a built-in bias based on what is being fed. So AI will not be, and we need to work on models where AI is able to fact-check as well. Let's assume we live in a world where AI is able to adequately fact-check. The real journalism which journalists need to be supported to do is the investigative journalism, where they are able to go out into the towns and the villages and the government offices and the panchayats and really find the stories that need to be told. Right now, that's a really difficult thing to do. Investigative journalism is not just difficult in India right now, it's dangerous. And so a lot of journalists are not doing investigative journalism. But in an ideal world, I would assume that the computer software is doing the stuff that needs to be done in the office and the journalists are out on field where they belong. So I don't think that journalism can entirely be replaced by computers, because you will still need people on the ground to see with their eyes and say, hey, this is not right. This should be a story that we write about. And if the computers can take over adequately fact-checking, that, in my opinion, is a good thing. It will make us all more efficient.
Faye, hi. Thanks for sharing your very interesting journey. And I have a slightly different take on the question that Ashish just asked. One can understand the need and the relevance of investigative journalism. But when you look at it in the context of the fact that if you are simply reporting news, and news is a reflection of reality as it exists, as is being reported presumably by you and other forums such as yourselves. The fact also is that today leaders, politicians, businessmen are able to blatantly lie about facts and get away with it. So there is a need perhaps for journalists also to be agent provocateurs of sort, where they're actually able to hold a mirror and challenge them on their statements, which may appear as truisms. Just because it is coming from them does not make it true. And I think part of what we loved about what you did in Mirror was the fact that you could hold a mirror to those people and actually put the facts, and even though those were facts, they were also reflective of your opinion, which is rooted in integrity. And if you are just going to report what is being said by somebody else, whether quoting other media sources or your own double verified information, that doesn't really bring the incisive inputs that erudite audiences would want to see. So how do you address that gap?
So we don't just report what was said exactly verbatim as what was said. We also add context. And I mark it out for those people who've read my work. I mark it out as context or background, saying, this is what was said by so-and-so individual, but this is the background of this story. And then I leave it to the audience, in your intelligence, to join those two things together and make up your mind. But there's always context and background, and there's always, if there's a need for fact check, then we put down a fact check at the bottom as well, saying this is what the data really says, or this is what the data does not say, or there is no data to support this. But I no longer stand up and give my opinion. It's just the route that I have decided to take.
That's fair. Thank you.
Any more questions? Yeah.
Hi. Are you going to bring back Good News Tonight? Because that really helped us during COVID and that was really amazing. And is it a possibility to do a format like that again?
I mean, it's possible to do. So for those who don't know what she's talking about, during COVID, in the first wave, when things were very grim, I used to, from my home, do a short bulletin called Good News Tonight, where I would just stitch together all kinds of positive information, good things that were happening in the world, so that we don't, believe that it's all so grim. It's possible to bring back if you feel the world is as grim. It's grimmer now. It's possible. We could do that again.
Faye, if I may ask a question, it's a broader question. Is journalism a business or is it a profession? Especially for people like you who have gone out to run it.
So it's fundamentally a profession, but in order to have good people do a good job at this profession, we have to also run a business. Because at the end of the day, journalists also have school fees to pay and rent and EMIs. And if you want talented people to come into this profession, we have to find ways to make the business viable enough so we can keep them engaged. So it has to also be a business.
So a follow-up question then,
Yes.
put yourself 36 years later. Why 36? Because Madison is 36 years old. So 36 years later, how do you think you're going to be able to sustain this model on some of those very worthy principles you mentioned? Because as you become more successful, you will also have a large organization to support, and all those business problems will come up.
Yes.
So what then?
So I believe idealistically that we can hold on to our ideals even when the company expands. I believe that from a trickle-down method where every sort of sergeant of every team understands the philosophy of the organization, and we're able to bring in and give room to journalists who want to do good work. We're able to associate with brands that want to do good work and want to be seen with credibility. I think we can build an organization that is carefully stacked in such a way that the work is credible. I don't think we have to think back very far in India to remember that journalism used to be credible. It's possible to do. We've lost our way at some point in the recent past. And I think that it's possible to find our way again. So even when we expand, if the philosophy, and I know that you do this in your organization and several others also, that you just reiterate the philosophy and that your philosophy is your North Star, and you're almost militant about the fact that as soon as you find a problem, you eliminate it. And everybody understands that this is what we stand for.
Hi, Faye. One question is that whether you're there on, I'm following you both on X and Instagram, but my worry is that one side is the money part. Okay, that's a secondary problem. I'm sure Sam will get you sponsors. But my bigger worry is the platform itself. As you know, the algorithms that govern X or they govern Instagram, they're created in such a way as to keep showing a closed loop environment to users. So if I'm a far-right nutcase, I'll keep seeing far-right nonsense. If I'm a progressive left guy, I'll keep seeing progressive stuff. And so the algorithm keeps optimizing towards that. The danger is that in sovereign law governing North Korean countries, like the ones we are heading towards, India is heading towards that, unfortunately, the government can say to X or to Instagram that, okay, this journalist news, you know, if they don't want to ban it because it'll be bad optics, they might say, force it down, you know, don't show it, like shadow banning, something like that. I'm optimistic that it might not happen, but we should always assume the worst case scenario because the world is in that position right now. Everywhere you see country after country, extreme far right vote share is increasing. It's scary actually. So if you're dependent on Instagram, on X, how do you escape that that world basically, to be independent? Can I, as an individual, directly, how do I directly reach, how do you directly reach me? I'm willing to subscribe, for example. How do we do that basically?
So it's a really excellent question. And unfortunately, like you said, this is the world we live in. So all forms of communication are controlled by 4 large companies right now, which is either Meta, Google, X, or what is the 4th one? So other than maybe sending each other India Post, everything else is controlled in India by these American companies. So I do believe there is a risk, and there's a sovereign risk for our country in general, given especially that during the inauguration of Trump, all these guys went and lined up next to him, and they were willing to, Meta, for example, sacrificed its fact-checking program, and they have sacrificed their diversity programs, and so they've shown their willingness to toe the line of their government at this point. And so even as a country, that's a risk that we're running, because as we have seen them do in the past, they can block out an entire government from communicating with its citizens. But this is the reality of the world we live in. And I want to believe that going further, each of our countries will find a way to balance this out. We need to start working on our own platforms, which are Indian. We need to start working on ways that we come out of the hegemony of the search engine optimization, where you can't publish anything without Google having a say, or you can't publish anything without Meta having a say, or Twitter, I think, has already lost its marbles completely in its X format. But you're absolutely right, and this is not just a problem for digital journalists. This is a problem for advertising. Because how are you reaching your audience again? if not on social media and on YouTube. This is a problem for marketing. This is a problem for all. I mean, right now, I was reading this very interesting article which said that the government allocates only so much money to digital advertising because all ministers have a lot of following anyway and they communicate directly. So they're also in that same trap. So right now, I think that it's a larger, more, perhaps sovereign problem that each country, including ours, needs to look at. So there are a lot of issues. I can't reach you. Citizen to citizen, friend to friend, mom to daughter, I can't reach you outside of these big 3-4 companies. I can't reach my audience outside of these companies. All of the data that we're looking at, the data that I just showed you, is data that Meta gives me. I have no way to third-party verify this data. I'm hoping as the market evolves, like you had in print and television, as the market evolves, there will be larger demands made for better credibility from these companies because they are at the end of the day private limited, and so their loyalty is to their shareholders. But as people who are using these platforms, I'm hoping going forward, countries and governments and people like us will demand better accountability from them, and hopefully we should be able to get it.
I have a question, perhaps a little provocative. The first question is, what made you take a decision to, in my opinion, tread a safe ground by not expressing a point of view about a relevant event? That's number one. Number two, if the first one, depending on your answer to the first question, what's the incremental value you are getting to the table in the world of journalism for readers like me?
So obviously, my first point is that the reason why I don't put out my opinion, and we actively work towards not putting out opinions and not letting it leak into the content, is because I believe that the world right now has been so divided between what is left and what is right. And like the gentleman just said, the far right pocket and the far left pocket, and everybody is being compartmentalized. I believe that from a business point of view, the future will be for the neutral and for those who have not taken sides. Because as soon as you take a side, you have now attached yourself to the fate of that particular political side. And depending on whether they succeed or they fail, you're now attached to that idea. And I believe that the business, from a business point of view, going forward, not taking sides is going to be the most important thing. And the incremental value that I believe I give to my audience is fact-checking. You don't need my opinion. You have your own opinion. You need my fact-checking. Because at the end of the day, when you share something on a family group or you share something on an office group, you don't want to be embarrassed by someone who says, actually, this is not true, by the way. You want to know that when you read something and you're trusting it, the person who's written it has put in the effort, as humanly possible, best efforts to make sure that this is fact-checked information. That is my contribution, and that is my proposal to my audience.
Yeah.
Hi, Faye. I want to express my gratitude to you for sharing your journey with us. I have 2 questions for you. The first one is,
So,
what are...
One second. I can hear you, but I can't see you.
Can you stand
Oh, there
up?
you are.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah.
Okay, my first question is, how do you deal with criticism and backlash from your reporting? Sorry, please say that. How do you deal with criticism and backlash from your reporting?
Backlash. You mean trolling?
Yeah, I mean, that could...
So I'd like to say that after 5 years, I've gotten used to it and it gets easier, but it doesn't. The trolling is still quite harsh, especially for women. In the public eye, the trolling then becomes of a sexual nature, which becomes even more difficult. I have trained myself to be able to tell the difference between feedback from someone who's genuinely offering me feedback and from simple trolling. Because, you know, there are people who are paid to show up on your page and write certain things. It's easy to tell them apart. They all make the same spelling mistakes. And irrespective of the content that you've posted, they'll still come and say, "Arey, tum sale ye something, something, something," right? What I do when people actually give me feedback, even if it's angry feedback, I always write back. and I give my point of view saying this is why we did it or this is why we don't do it and this is our, and sometimes the answer is enough, sometimes it's not enough, but like I said, that's the respect and dignity to the audience when someone writes back saying, I don't like the way you did this, I want to understand why you did not cover this story or why you covered this story or why you used this name or not. I always make it a point to sit and write back to people as much as possible.
Thank you. My second question is, what are the challenges of reporting on sensitive issues like corruption or human rights, etc.?
So I think that based on the law, if the reporting is factual, then the law ideally, in an ideal world, protects you from harm. I want to believe we live in that ideal world, and that is the protection.
Thank you.
Hi, may I? Sam, it's me here. The most hated professional in India today is probably the media professional. Many youngsters, as a result, are asking us that, is there a future for journalism and journalists? How are you trying to kind of guide them and mentor them?
So, like I said, sir, earlier, I believe that for as long as we continue to call ourselves a democracy, there's not just a future, I saw that, there's not just a future, but there is a need for journalism. There is a tapestry of independent journalists across our country, each in their pockets trying to do their best. There are people who only report on tribal affairs, tribal journalists. There are people who only report on caste issues. There are people who only cover specific cities, specific communities. There are those who only cover South India, North India, Uttar Pradesh, Bihar in various languages, but they exist. They're going largely unnoticed by mainstream because of all the noise that mainstream guys are still making because they can fling so much money at the problem. But if you actually listen a little more carefully, you will find out that all the young people in your families have, from a system of mistrust, switched to independent journalism. So the independent journalists exist, they're doing good work, and their moment will come. All of the money that is funneling through television will eventually keel over. These brands will have to look for new places to associate, and that moment will come. So whenever I meet a young person who asks me, what should we do? I say, find a journalist who is of high credibility and work with that journalist and learn your craft. Because when you work with someone of low credibility, you get disillusioned and you leave the profession and you think it's dying. But it's not dying. It's very, very much alive. And it's thriving, actually. It's not just surviving.
Vikram.
What according to you is news, and equally what is not news?
I'm assuming everybody heard that question. What is news and what is not news? Okay. So on the first day of journalism school, they teach you that news is information that the citizen needs to know. So the word citizen is important because it's information that's relevant to you as a citizen. And it's information you need to know, not what you want to know. So what someone wore to the airport this morning, you don't need to know it, especially not as a citizen. As a citizen, the information that you need to know is what aids your decision making when you appoint your government, state, center, and city. And that's the information that we should be giving you as journalists. However small, however big, however you want to look at it. No one has asked me yet, normally people ask me, where the name Beetroot came from.
Yes, that was the question.
So the name Beetroot comes from the idea that it's good for you. I mean, yes, there's a lot of play on the sound, which as advertisers you'll know, it sounds like be true, it sounds like be rooted, it sounds like truth. But it's also good for you. Our grandmothers gave us beetroot, we are now putting it in our salads and our juices. You have to, in order to be a functioning member of society, eat your vegetables every day. There's only so much butter chicken you can have, right? So I see the news as your vegetables. It's not meant to be exciting. It's not meant to be chatpata. It's not meant to be shouty, screamy, leave you with a slightly excited feel when you're done consuming it. It's meant to be your vegetables. And when you consume your vegetables on a daily basis, in the boring, deadpan way that we serve it to you, you will be a better functioning member of society. You will understand how your city works better. You will understand how your state works. You will understand how your country works. And you'll be able to make better choices as a citizen. So that's why it's good for you.
So then would that be your advice to the existing news networks? To get boring, to get dull, to get sort of non-spicy?
Yeah, I mean, I have so much advice for them. I mean, my short advice would be pack it up and go home, it's not working anymore. But really, if I really could tell them, I would say, have you no shame. You know better. Everyone who has been to journalism school knows better than what is happening on news television right now. You know better. And the damage they're doing is real and dangerous and permanent. Fundamentally go back to what journalism is. It is information that has been fact-checked, that the audience needs to know. It is not what your political masters are telling you to do.
Faye, is there any newspaper or TV channel in any part of the world that is able to follow your advice?
No? I mean, as long as there's no advertiser involved. I mean, there used to be, and this is a tough question, I don't know really the answer, and I'll accept to you that I don't know what the answer is right now. The Washington Post used to be a philanthropy model where Jeff Bezos bought the Washington Post and said, run it to the best of your ability. And only recently he has decided to go back on his word and tell them what to write editorially. He fired the editor of opinions at the Washington Post. So I don't know the answer to that question. And I think that in every newsroom that I have worked in, I have seen screaming fights between the editor and the head of sales. Where the head of sales will say, no, but yaar, kaise kamaoge? You have to pay the salaries, and the editor will say, this is never going to happen. At least that should happen. At least there should be a push and a pull. At least there has to be some pushback from editorial. There has to be some balance between these two things. I accept the fact that it has to be a business, and we have to, I work with brands all the time. I find ways to associate with brands, and we do it repeatedly year after year, and to very good results, where the audience is happy, I'm happy, the brand is happy. It's possible to do without killing the goose. And I think the problem right now is that the goose is nearly dead.
Can you give us an example of that?
Of what I have done? Sure. So I do what I call purpose-led programming, where if there's a brand that has put out a message, and the message allies with the message that I have, which is that Dove will put out a message about how women should not be bullied by the color of their skin and how they look. That's a message I also believe in. So we find a way to work on content based on that message together. There are brands working on mental health. There are brands working on women's rights. Brands are working on the environment, on good advice for young people. And all of these things, we've partnered with them and put out content that makes sense. We did an entire campaign for Bumble, which is a dating app, on the laws of the internet for India. So women who are using the internet in India know what is stalking, when they can file a complaint, where do you go to file a complaint, and how the law will support you. And this is fact-checked proper information that we put out that suited the brand, that suited the audience, that suited me. It's possible to do, to find partnerships that work.
This is about the company I worked for many years. And we ran our own ad. And it said, on spaces like this, you can tell a truth, a half-truth, exaggerate, or lie. And on your decision rests the fate of our profession. Of course, then we used advertising. You can say journalism. I love the word dignity, by the way.
Yeah, I think that will be the last question.
Okay. Thanks, Faye, for sharing your inspiring story. More power to you. My question is, in today's day of AI and ChatGPT and the fact that everybody's writing short-form content and abbreviations, and most of us in this room have probably grown up with a Renan Martin. So I just feel that the art of writing and the flair of writing is dying. And I feel that is the DNA of being a journalist. What, in your view, is the future of the art of writing?
So personally, I believe that we can never live in a world where there is no writing. I think with AI will make life easier for writers because it will be able to pull research faster, it will be able to find sources faster. Now, there are applications within OpenAI that do deep dive research that can help PhD students. So it's possible to use it for all of those things. But real writing is like hand-woven silk, right? There's a difference between the hand-woven stuff and the machine-made stuff. You can tell the difference. It commands a better price. It's more beautiful.
Thanks, that's
And
exactly what we want.
And I think that difference will stay.
So on that note, let's call it a day. Sudesh?
For your thought-provoking ideas on journalism and future of journalists, may I now request Sam Balsara to present a memento to Faye D'Souza. We would now like to present a memento to sponsors of this event, Amazon MX Player, Mr. Karan Bedi.
Yes.